Today's August 23rd, 2023. I'm Dr. Randy Bach. I'm honored today to have the amazing and interesting, um, um, articulate, great writer, musician, Tal Bachman with me. Tal, uh, what's it been like lately? And can you tell us about your amazing series on, of all things, rugby?
It's been awesome lately. I just finished a rock and roll tour with my dad. We were down in Iowa and Michigan, so that was lots of fun. And yeah, I did finish the rugby series a few weeks ago on Stein Online, which was a lot of fun for me. I don't know about anybody else, but
That was a lot of fun for me. It wasn't so much fun. I mean, I think it's I don't know what the word would be. Deeply redolent. I'm
hmm,
a. This is not going to be about me, but I am a medical doctor, but I spent a lot of my time playing squash. And it was like
right,
at a certain point, I thought that I was doing the medicine obviously to keep things going, have a family, and keep the practice, employ people, help the world, and so forth. But at certain times, just between me and me, I thought to myself, well, this is just a great way to keep my squash career going. I make enough money that I can keep part of a squash club and this and that. And it was a lot of there was a lot of uh, um, attention and intention to just keep the squash going. So I came to it late, and in my 30s, and I hadn't really been an athlete. I was kind of the study guy, doing medicine and chemistry and physics and all that kind of stuff, and so I never really posited myself as an athlete. But it just became an intense, consuming thing to get
right.
out there and lose oneself in this midst of reaction time and all that kind of stuff. So I give that as a partial preface to the fact that your stuff is on rugby, but it also has a universal quality, and you bring out some really amazing historical aspects. I'd like you to talk about who is he? I don't know if he's professor or headmaster, whatever, Arnold, at the rugby school itself, and maybe tell us a little bit about what his ethos and passions were.
Sure. Well, I mean, the sport of rugby originates in England in the well, officially, it originates about 200 years ago, according to legend, and it originates at rugby school in Warwickshire. And it was the in-house ball game. So when you dive into these British private schools, which they actually call public schools over there for kind of, it's just that kind of linguistic, interesting linguistic idiosyncrasy. What British public schools are what we would call private schools. Um, I mean, that was the in-house ball game in some form or other for the previous couple of centuries. In fact, rugby school was founded by Queen Elizabeth the First's official grocer, so it had been around for like a long time. And so, in the what year was it? 1828. Rugby school is on the decline. In fact, a lot of those schools are on the decline, and the board decides to look around for a new headmaster. And they get a bunch of applications, and one of them is from a young fella named Thomas Arnold, who comes with, well, he had bumped around a little bit as a private tutor, and I think he had been a headmaster at a small school, but he came with a glowing recommendation from one of his uh, professors at Oxford. And so the board took a chance and hired this young guy who I think was only 32 at the time, had a wife and a little family. He shows up at rugby school, and by the standards of his time, he is a radical innovator. Um, I mean, another thing that you notice when you dive into the history of British private schools is that certainly in that era, I mean, they seem so bleak, a lot of these places. I mean, there's floggings and bullying, and it just seems no good. And he shows up with all of these great new ideas that have never been tried before, but which he feels sure will work. He's also a very sincere Christian. and this is an era before Christianity has lapsed into like the mainstream of Protestant Christianity, before it has lapsed into this kind of Ned Flanders Hallmark card kind of vacuous feel good thing. I mean, this is an era when Protestant Christianity overall is still very focused on what they used to call like your walk and your talk, your actions. It's not like Christianity for Thomas Arnold, as for many of his contemporaries, was not the almost exclusively creedal religion that it would become now 200 years later, where in so many versions of certainly of Protestant Christianity, it's just about what you believe. For them, it's not just about what you believe, it's about how you act. So there is something like an ideal Christian gentleman, and one of your main tasks on earth as a disciple of Christ is to come to embody that. So it's not that it's cookie cutter, because everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, because God has distributed different talents to different people. It's that with what God has given you, you have a duty to become, to fulfill your destiny. And in Thomas Arnold's world, the paragon of manhood is like the Christian British gentleman. And so he wants the boys at rugby school, who range from, I think it's like a 9 or 10 to 15. I mean, you're young guys. He wants to create those sorts of citizens. I mean, not only will they be worthy disciples of Christ, but they will be co-builders of the greatest civilizing force on earth, which for Thomas Arnold is the British Empire, right? It's anti-slavery, it's rule of law, it's ordered liberty. In his mind, as in the minds of so many of his contemporaries, it's the pinnacle of civilization, the British empires that then exist. So he shows up at rugby school as the new headmaster in 1828, and the in-house ball game exists, and it's this raucous affair where every boy in the school is out on the front green, this big kind of open space, which is still there if you go to the campus. And it's just, I mean, it's one ball, two teams. There's like 150 guys out there, kids out there. They're all kicking at the ball and trying to kind of advance the ball across a line at the other end of the pitch, as they call it. And somewhere, at some point during Thomas Arnold's tenure as headmaster, passing enters into this in-house ball game. And with the advent of passing, like somebody can pick up the ball and pass it, but also run with it to advance the ball. So it moves on from almost exclusively a kind of a dribbling, kicking along the ground and punting game to dribbling along the ground, punting, but also picking up the ball and running. And now there's tackling, and now there's passing. It sort of emerges, like a proto rugby emerges. So that's according to legend, that's 200 years ago this year, right? So that actually predates Thomas Arnold's arrival, but like the best historical accounts, the legend predates his arrival. The best historical accounts say that rugby actually became rugby while Thomas Arnold was there. So anyway, I wrote this whole series about it, and I incorporated a few recollections of my own experience playing not so long ago. I mean, my last game was the last game before the COVID lockdown, so it was like December of 2019 or something, late November. And that's a bit of the background.
So that's what interested me about your story is kind of the dual aspect of it, kind of the external application of a guiding principle, to take basically order out of disorder. There's the rugby game, and there's all this mass movement and so forth, and to take that and turn it into what you call muscular Christianity and kind of the ethos and plan for man, and then actually kind of on a personal basis how it developed for you and what that moment is. It's kind of like there's a kind of a internal out, external aspect. I mean, I studied chemistry, and I was amazed, at various points to learn about polymers. That you take a little hexagonal tile, basically a benzene ring, and you can make polystyrene out of it. You can make big things. The big event, much like with crystals, crystals have an order that reflects in its external order. So when you see a diamond, that ordering that you see of the facets of a diamond is actually happening on a molecular basis or an atomic basis between the carbon atoms and so forth. So without getting too diffuse about this, in a sense, what's happening kind of on the molecular level is you're playing rugby. So you're banging against people. And so it's a very messy object. But on the external level, that's taking you someplace else. That's taking you and making you into a man. I think you actually do an interesting job of finding, kind of going down to this, atomic level or pattern level of the benzene ring, and then have it be polymerized into something that's bigger, creating this fabric of camaraderie with the clubs, and kind of the respect for your enemies and so forth, your combatants. And then, it's a forging process. To get back to chemistry, you make steel by forging it and annealing it and having it mixed with other, like metals and so forth. I find it fascinating that you are able to bring so many different levels of integrity, I guess, to and from the sport. Can you just talk a little bit about your own kind of personal annealing process? What it's like? It's easy to like talk about rugby, but it's a physical thing. Do you break your fingers? Do you break your bones? I mean, do you still feel that way? If you have your shoulder dislocated or if you've tumbled on and been concussed, how is that in process for you? And what are the moments like? And how do you kind of get these epiphanies, from the field onto the paper? And how do you, think they transmute kind of socially and globally amongst the rugby players, fulfilling Thomas Arnold's, vision?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I really like how you're diving deep into this. Yeah. Well, okay. For me, if we had grown up in New Zealand, maybe we wouldn't recall this process in the same way. But I started playing. After my marriage implodes in the late 2000s or whatever. So I'm already well into adulthood. In fact, I'm older than most of the guys on the team. But not only that, I'd never really been into the gym. So I'd never really done, other than kind of running around with the Boy Scouts when I was a kid and hiking and camping, I'd never done anything that violent and that kind of ritualistically violent. I played baseball and stuff, but other than the odd clash between catcher and a third base runner, that's not really a contact sport, or maybe at second base during a steal. So one of the things for me is that it's really scary. You don't really to kind of not play, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I'm going to play. Well, there's always going to be somebody bigger than you on the pitch, against you, trying to stop you. You have to either tackle them or they're going to tackle you, or a couple of them are going to tackle you. And depending on what position you're playing, you might be way out in the open and guys have lined you up and they've gotten like a good, 20 meter, as they use metric in rugby, 20-meter gallop on you. And you're like sitting there, you're waiting for the punt to drop because you're playing out on the wing like a wide receiver, right? That kind of equivalent in football. So one of the parts of this is just, for me, and I think for others, is going through the process of looking at something that is just mortally, viscerally terrifying. Just the there's no other way to put it, just the terror of being completely crushed, and it hurts, just like instant pain, or like having something broken, breaking an arm or something, and you're like, this kid doesn't really make sense. But one of the parts of that process that you were alluding to is that step-by-step journey through all of that, that psychological process where you're actually preparing yourself in every different way to enter the lists, as you might say, to actually just get in there and play. And the moment that you do set foot on the pitch for the first time, then your size, your age, your race, anything else about you completely dissolves for everyone else on your team, because you're there with them in a kind of simulated combat. Well, it's actually not simulated. I mean, it's like athletic combat. So, and that's just the first part of it. Like, you've gone through that process where you've prepared yourself physically so you can add value, you can help your team win, but you've also gone through that process of overcoming this terror, this just paralyzing fear. So that in and of itself has placed you in a fairly, unusual and small fraternity. So now all of a sudden, before you've even really done anything, before you've even gotten smoked for the first time, you're kind of part of a club, right? And you all earned yourself there, earned your way there. And then you go on, and you learn how to excel together and, work together as teammates on the pitch and off, because you're always kind of scheming about, new ways to play and how we're going to take care of this opponent next week. So, you're always kind of talking about it. And then on the field, of course, there's a lot of chit chat. So that's the first thing is that kind of that individual journey to a kind of, I don't want to use too much hyperbole, but a kind of a warrior state of mind where you're ready to just go out there and do whatever it takes to win and to bail out your buddies, because sometimes they get into trouble during the game. They get tackled and they're, whatever, they might get stomped, and you got to kind of bail them out a little bit in that split second. I mean, the second thing too that's interesting about this is that you've got 15 individual agents on a team. They're opposed to 15 other individual agents on a team. As you pointed out, like the opportunities for just total chaos are just astronomical. So one of the other cool things is that at a group endeavor, but it's like multiple layers of group endeavor, because it's you and the guy next to you. But now it's the third guy that's kind of in your little pod as you're kind of there on the pitch. And maybe it's the 4 or 5 guys around you. And ultimately it's all 15 of you. At those various levels of order, you're working together to create a potent order out of chaos. And so you're doing that through, well, some of it happens off the field, of course. Like you'll practice going through different motions and routines and like coming up with little calls, and because it's happening. I mean, the flow there in rugby is, of course, it's very much unlike football, where you have stop-start, a kind of stop-start thing, right? You run a play, the play is blown dead, and then you get back into a huddle. Well, rugby, it's just ongoing. Unless there's an infraction or somebody kicks the ball out of bounds, it just keeps going. So you are learning in real time, but at very fast real time, how to carve out of or create out of this total chaos and disorder, order, but not just order, like potent achieving order. I could go on, but I don't know if that's kind of what you were.
That's excellent. So are there stoppages if somebody gets injured? I mean, what happens? Or injuries just kind of like you're going to move right on, and you're not going to be able to do that much? I mean, are there substitutions? I'm not a rugbyist.
Well, if you get kind of knocked over and you can't get up for a while, play will continue. So they're kind of playing around you. So every once in a while you'll see a guy just like, lying there, like grabbing his leg or something. He just got, a knee into his thigh or something, and he's like temporarily can't get up. So play will continue. If somebody gets really genuinely injured, like the referee sees, somebody like maybe goes into a tackle, you're running full speed, there's no helmets, and maybe somebody gets an elbow to the head and the guy's knocked out. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. And one reason it doesn't happen very often is well, the two reasons. You're not trying to hurt people. You're trying to take them out of the play, but you're not trying to like permanently brain damage somebody for the most part. I mean, I didn't really see that. So that's the first thing. You're not trying to permanently injure your opponents. You're just trying to like win. But number two is you spend hours and hours in practice on your tackling technique, right? So you're practicing going low, taking the heads out of your, trying to practicing getting tackled safely, you're moving your head out of the way, and practicing tackling other people, moving your head out of the way and not hurting the other guy. But sometimes there's accidents, right? You jump up and you kind of get hit and you're off balance and you get a knee to the head. In those cases, the referee can just will blow the whistle and stop the game because, obviously a player's health is more important than winning this game. But other than that, stoppages will occur when somebody has broken a rule. Although even then, the play doesn't necessarily stop. So if we have the ball and one of the defenders breaks a rule as he's trying to, say, tackle one of us, the referee won't stop the play necessarily. He'll let play continue. It's at his discretion how long he lets it continue. But to stop the play just because a defender committed an infraction when we have the ball would be to penalize us, right? Because we might be on the verge of scoring. So it would arrest our momentum. So what the referee will do is he'll just hold out his hand and he'll yell advantage. So that just means the defenders have committed a penalty. I'm not going to stop the play right now. We're going to see if these guys can like make something happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 plays. And if it doesn't, then he'll stop the play. And then he'll bring the ball back to where the infraction was committed, and then we can like say try to kick for 3 points or something like that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on all the rules, but yeah. Or if somebody kicks the ball out of bounds, there'll be a stoppage in play, and then you'll have like a line out throw. So kind of in soccer, where the guy will throw the ball in. It's like
So what were the changes? Once you are part of rugby, rugby is part of you. I'm quoting Tal Bachman. What part of you is rugby? What did it do to you? How did it change you? Where do you see yourself now, and do you recommend it?
It never leaves you if you dive in. I mean, there's people that like were kind of forced into playing rugby at school, and it didn't really take because they weren't really into it or something. Because but if you dive into rugby because that's something that you're really interested in, and you give it a go. Those rhythms and new sort of psychological traits that never leaves you. So and one of the reasons that it doesn't leave you is because there is no better simulation of the chaos, the rough and tumble of normal life than rugby. I mean, there's no sport that has more applicable life lessons, just like, because and also I guess it somewhat depends, a little bit maybe depend on your position, but not that much. I mean, because you're all in it together. It's all the 15 guys. So just as you go through life, like for example, thinking in terms of teams, right? I mean, how far can you get on this planet just alone? As a hermit, like just the one man band. You can't really get that far. You got to look.
There was Herman and the Hermits. They
yeah. Well, exactly. A group endeavor, right? The Herman and the Hermits. They had the managers, they had the publishers, they had the songwriters, they had the guys that performed on stage. And Peter Noone is still out there, I think.
Touring. Is he really?
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm glad it's Peter Noone and not Peter No One.
Yeah. Yeah. but yeah, all of those things, that never really leaves you because it's just the same kinds of things. Like when is the moment that you and your team are going to strike, and so you kind of develop a sense for like the kind of momentum in life. Like for example, in business negotiations, I know this sounds fanciful, but this is actually true. Or even just kind of going through that process of like you're looking at a really potentially uncomfortable, like a socially awkward, social anxiety inducing situation, but you've already gone through it. So, right, with rugby, right? You've already gone through this process, so it's like after that, it's like, yeah, I can handle this. All of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
When do you play it? When do you play rope a dope? I'm talking about like you're building your business or you're trying. When are you going to go rope a dope? And then when you are playing rope a dope, when are you going to strike? Well, you have to be able to kind of sense in an animal way when your opponent is vulnerable and with your team, right? So you have to be a team manager. It's kind of like this is kind of like maybe one of the reasons why I have felt critical of Trump. You know, I watched this guy in action, unable to put together a team of like-minded warriors, unable to keep them together, unable to keep them motivated, unable to kind of to lay out plans and stick to plans and adapt where necessary, of course, while keeping your team intact. And of course, there's this kind of telescoping aspect to all of that, where you might be the captain, but you've got your right hand man, and then you've got like your little bit outer circle, and on and on and on it goes. And it was frustrating for me to watch Trump. Not that he had no successes, but that he missed opportunities because he wasn't able to, as I say, think and act in teams. And here's the thing that I came up with on my own when I was playing. Is this, and this is like a good slogan for life, but so I'll share it with your viewers. Here it is. It's Bachman's first rule of success in life. Good teams beat great players.
Right.
Okay. Good teams beat great players. So you're up against a team. They might have the greatest player in the league, but if they're not playing as a team, they're not.
Yeah. No, I think Mike Trout understands that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the Angels have two of the greatest players literally in history, possibly
the number 1 and 2 best players ever.
Literally, and can't put it together. Like, I mean, I don't know what happened I just got off this tour, right? So I wasn't really following that closely. What Ohtani's up to 40 something homers though, right?
Yeah, he's up there,
right? Like 40. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the two greatest players, and they can't friggin' put it together. But think about like a team of like, let's say like you're starting high school freshman team, your best 14 and 15-year-old kids. It's 5 basketball players, and they're going to play against Michael Jordan alone. The team is going to win. I mean, they could be up against Michael Jordan in his prime, Wayne Gretzky in his prime, like 5 teenage kids against one guy. He could be the greatest guy in the world. They're still going to win. There's like 5 of them. So all of those kinds of things. So, I mean, that was just one of the many ways where I just watched Trump in those 4 years, which he's never going to get again. He's never going to win re-election. Just thinking, yeah, okay, well, you got a bunch of cool stuff done, but you would have gotten a lot more done and also won re-election if you had whipped your people together.
Well, I think for all intents and purposes, he had his re-election grooved, and I think he was sabotaged. That gets a whole another can of worms and multiple cans of worms. I think he had a good economy. He had low unemployment, and I think he was purposely misled on coronavirus, and Jeffrey Tucker brings it up. I don't want to get down too far this rabbit hole, but between March 9th and March 11th, 2020, his tweets, now that we can see them again, his tweets vastly changed. He was basically saying it's a cold, buckle up, you'll survive. It's be tough, muscular Christianity, if you will. And then on March 11th, he was like lockdown. I think he was fed, misinformation about that this was a Chinese bioweapon, and the dates coincide with the National Defense Council and meetings and so forth. Dr. Fauci, I think they went with the Chinese narrative because the enemy of, I think there was basically kind of a sedition in ignoring the Diamond Princess open source, clear data that this was not that dangerous, and going with the PRC's take on matters. And China wanted to get rid of Trump, and so did they. And I think he was the real virus. I agree with you that he's not, like all of our leaders, he has his failings. He did better than President Romney, by virtue of becoming president. So there's you have to be there. He did better than President McCain.
No, sorry to interrupt. He ran a brilliant guerrilla campaign in 2016, for sure.
Yeah, and they weren't going to quote the Who, they were not going to get fooled again. This happened to Scott Brown in Massachusetts. You remember that election? That was the Obamacare election, and somehow Scott Brown won this open. I think it was the demised Ted Kennedy seat, and they weren't going to let it happen again, and they didn't. He did not manage to come back, for his non-special election. And so the Democrats, they don't have any problem with team sports. They don't have a genuine leader. They're an amorphous, they're the blob, and they don't have great ideas, but they manage to, they're good at cohesion. And so it doesn't really matter about which or about whom they cohese. And Republicans, it's like herding cats. All the Republicans are, they're more independent minded. They don't like Groucho Marx. They don't want to belong to any club that will take the likes of them as a member. And it's tough for them to form, coalitions or to listen to anybody else. So it might be part and parcel of that problem.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, ultimately, Trump, obviously he has to take responsibility for a lot of this stuff, right? It's not like, as you pointed out, it's not like there wasn't information available early on to kind of puncture what became the official narrative. Right. But I don't know if he didn't.
I think he had kind of a generational respect for doctors, and he went along with what the experts said at that moment. He was, speechifying and so forth. Had Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci. Yeah, I don't think he realized what snakes they were. Later on he got Dr. Scott Atlas. But it's hard within the academy. A lot of these doctors are being promoted up. They're kind of the watermelon seeds that get pushed up, but by institutions that are very much lockstep in promoting, a left of center cohesion narrative, socialism, and so forth. And they're very bureaucratically aligned. I would say. They're following orders. It's kind of militaristic, like an organizational.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I just feel like if there were a lot of people that didn't get rolled, there were, it's not like there weren't good data early on suggesting that literally every single bullet point, what do they call them in Hollywood? Beats. Every single beat or like kind of story point of the official story was at the very least doubtful.
Yes.
So it's like, so you're sitting there, I don't know. It's like, how do you miss that? And it's not like, as you mentioned with Scott Atlas, it's not like Donald Trump didn't have the opportunity to get, opposing views. He had guys around him that were begging him to listen to them, telling him that Fauci and Birx were completely untrustworthy. And, not for the first or last time, he blew off the people that were telling him the truth and trusted the wrong people.
Yeah, I think it was. Clearly that's a tragic flaw. I think that it's hard for me to. I get it, but I think there were a lot of people at work to convince him thereof, and it was deeply institutional. You can see it right now. They basically cough up like a hairball anybody that disagrees, and they do worse than that. There's a lot of. The only good thing that I've kept saying about COVID-19 is you've seen who your friends are, and you've seen in which it's been kind of a stress test for institutions in general. It didn't just happen here. The places that were our friends, our national congeners of the British Commonwealth and so forth, Australia, New Zealand, they send their troops into Vietnam when we send our troops in. They follow us into Afghanistan and so forth. They turned into mini despotic potentates basically parliamentary potentates on, and they found the fault line of democracy.
Well, yeah, as did governors, right? It's like Gretchen Whitmer and all these guys, all these people. I mean, they
Yeah,
turned into like mini tyrants within the United States.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think that. I don't think that we should. Okay, I know. Let me do just on this point really quick. I mean, we tend to evaluate people in terms of like their performance against an ideal, like what we think their performance should have been, and then of course the other way of assessing them is relative to their to flesh and blood other options. So there's Trump versus Vivek or whatever his name is, and DeSantis and whoever else is going to throw, whoever else is running, who's better and everything. And then there's kind of like, was this behavior did President Trump, behave on whatever issue in a way that he should have, sort of independent of what the other options were. And on that last thing, I don't think that we should forget that it was under Donald Trump that American citizens suffered the most egregious obliteration of their constitutional rights in the history of the Republic, minus, I guess, slavery and Jim Crow. I mean, he did nothing while governors around the United States obliterated constitutional rights. Now, what I keep coming back to is, and I don't know if we've discussed this in a past video, but if, let's say, the governor of Alabama tomorrow announced that he was going to re-enslave Black people, we would all expect the federal government to move in. The president would move in. You're not allowed to do that because you're abridging constitutional rights. And what is a president? Well, everyone sort of thinks about this, thinks of him as like a super legislator or like a monarch or something. He's first and foremost a law enforcement officer. That is what the Constitution says he is. He is the chief federal law enforcement officer. He swears an oath to uphold the Constitution and federal law. And that's what federal agencies, executive branch agencies, do. They are all like emanations of a president's federal law enforcement authority, and not just authority, but obligation. That's what the EPA is. That's what the DOJ is. And of course, the DOJ overlooks FBI. That's what those agencies all are. So, one of my questions is, we didn't have the governor of Alabama announcing he was going to re-enslave Black people, but we did have governors doing similar things in terms of like obliterating, let's say, your right to attend a worship service, right? And and these, like attend church and stuff. You can't leave your house. You've been incarcerated. So we had like liberals crying for, I'm not saying without reason, fussing and going crazy over Japanese internment camps from World War II. I'm not saying without reason. And yet we had governors in the United States that turned their states into giant internment camps, like confining American citizens to their own homes, including our like elderly parents and grandparents, who they like locked into state care facilities. Outrageous obliteration of constitutional rights, and even beyond constitutional rights, like what the framers might have called your natural rights, rights that inhere within you just by virtue of you being alive, before we ever get to writing up a constitution or writing a statute. So we got violations of constitutional rights, statutory or civil rights that have been kind of granted to us through political, means like legislation, and natural or unalienable rights. And Donald Trump tweets about it while these governors are doing this. So, we wouldn't give a pass to a president who just tweeted complaints about the Alabama governor re-enslaving Black people. So why are we doing that with Donald Trump when he did nothing to rein in these crackpot tyrant Gretchen Whitmer, Andrew Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo kills 10,000 plus seniors by forcing people that he knows are COVID positive into state care facilities and kills them all. And nobody holds him responsible, like not Donald Trump. This was Donald Trump. So Randy, like one of my beefs, one of the reasons why I don't even know that I want to kind of associate with mainstream conservatives anymore is that they give Donald Trump a pass on all of this stuff. When if it were Hillary Clinton doing all of this, they would still be apoplectic and they would be demanding like Nuremberg style trials and be branding her a traitor. And instead, a lot of these people are like kind of hoping that he wins re-election again. Where was this guy, the law and order president, defending constitutional rights during these crazy lockdowns? There were people like in California that were out on the beach like body surfing and stuff, and like, you know, the state of California is like arresting them. Now he would say, all of his defenders say, well, those were state matters. My retort is no, they're not state matters any more than like the Alabama governor situation would be a state. That we sorted that out after the Civil War. That's what the post-Civil War constitutional amendments dealt with. They extended those protections. You know, that basically those amendments said states can't abridge these basic rights. So, like, you know, like, where was the guy? He's still defending his record on this stuff. He's still defending like Operation Warp Speed. And he's still saying things like, well, I was never in favor of lockdowns. And it's like, yeah, well, but you didn't stop them. You didn't use your executive branch power, defender of the Constitution, to stop governors from like Andrew Cuomo murdering people in the name of public health. I mean, how that is like Soviet Union level shit. In the name of public health, I will kill you. I mean, that's basically what Andrew Cuomo said, and he got away with it. No one is going to hold this guy responsible. I think it happened under a Republican president.
Points well taken. I'd have to go back look over the historical record to see, you know, what his statements were in the interim. I think he had a difficult hand. There were riots in the summer of 2020.
Yeah, because he didn't stop them.
No, this was a state by state thing. And I think there was a play, you know, to keep the federal government with a small footprint or, you know, I think he thought that would be interpreted as the federal government overreach. And he wanted to,
Of course he did. Of course he did. Who cares? That's your job. You have Soros-funded insurrectionist rioters going nuts, not for like on a bad weekend, but week after week after week after week for months. And the Democrat governors are protecting them because they're all on the same team. So we have true, literal insurrectionists, rioters being protected by Democratic governors who are ordering their municipal police forces, state National Guards and police forces to stand down and let these people just run riot and do what? Violate constitutional rights, burn down businesses, attack people, loot, steal private property. So private property rights are out the window. And this goes on in states. And Donald Trump, we have to listen to Donald Trump tell us for months and months and months, as morale is sinking. He looks completely impotent and useless. And the entire country, the entire United States looks absolute, like friggin' ridiculous to everyone else in the world. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. No one will stop these obviously coordinated riots in city after city after city. It goes on for months. Are you kidding? And what we get to hear from Donald Trump is, I can't do anything unless these Democratic governors invite me in to kind of use the National Guard. And if they did, I could get it sorted in 10 minutes. Yeah, you don't need, either Trump didn't know that he didn't need to be invited in by governors. And if he didn't, that's almost like unforgivable ignorance. And if he did know, he was lying. And of course, he doesn't need permission, no more than Eisenhower needed permission from Arkansas to activate their National Guard to force Governor Faubus to integrate Arkansas schools in the 1950s. You don't need that. You just don't. So why did you let these like I said, these Soros-funded insurrectionist rioters literally run riot for months and months and months? And I'm supposed to just like pretend that you were powerless to stop that? I don't get it. Like, I mean, I sound like a maniac, like compared to everybody else. I don't think I'm a maniac. I think like I'm normal. This is like outrageous disorder, criminal disorder.
Absolutely. No,
Um,
it was
it's like,
huge. It was.
and it's like I don't want to hear a guy kvetching anymore. It's just so ridiculous. It's like the conservative, what passes for conservatism is just like kvetch culture. Everybody sits around. It's like Hannity and Levin every night, just like complaining about everything. Like friggin' do something. If he had every, I mean, this is. I know that DeSantis has run a poor campaign. He's not exactly Mr. Charisma, but he does have a point when he's like he looks at Trump and says like, why didn't you use your power and live up to your obligation to stop some of this stuff? And there's no explanation from the Trump campaign.
Yeah. I think I don't want to just kind of dig a ditch here, but in his defense, I think it was hard. The society has been very good at kneecapping anybody who puts Trump on his resume, and they criminalized being part of the Trump administration. And I think there's probably a fair amount of magnetic kind of repulsion effect that people did not necessarily band to help him. I also think that he's a loner in the sense that he keeps his own counsel and makes his own decisions. And I to your point, I think that all of us are generally smarter than any one of us. And I think there were faults, and he did come around, but there was a timing error, and I'm not sure whether he could have done anything to the real tragic flaw here, which was this mass mail-in balloting, which caused the harvesting, which caused even pre-election his ultimate demise, and that allowed them to sequester Joe Biden. But on a pragmatic basis, because I do think that it's not just gender that's binary, it's politics that's binary. It comes down to compared to what. So it depends. I'm happy to have a Republican primary and try to figure out the best man standing, and/or a Democratic one to see if RFK Jr. can put any kind of like threat into the establishment. But I kind of feel that it's going to be Michelle Obama marched up as kind of Obama basically a third, fourth term by then. And we're going to go into kind of a one-party state. I don't know how to avoid this once the electoral process has been polluted. I don't know. It's an unfortunate situation that they have managed, in a sense, to kind of weaponize Trump as an IED against the party potentially. I'm not saying that he's automatic to lose because I don't know the future that well, but clearly the way things are playing out, every kind of bit of kryptonite they put in his path seems to make him stronger currently. But it's going to be, far interesting times. I'm not sure that anybody non-Trump can garner the Republican primary because, for all that you said, truthfully and earnestly about the pandemic portion, he was done wrong, and he continues to be done wrong, and they're grotesque in their animosity to him, and thus can be reinterpreted. If he scares them that much, then he is the guy, and he's the one we should put up. And I do think I try to temper the COVID stuff with all the better stuff. I mean, George W. Bush was president for 8 years, and we have John Roberts. His dad gave us David Souter. They mean basically total like empty suitish kind of guys, and Trump didn't. So he was able to take good advice. I'm not sure about him. About what's her name, the last one. What's her name? The woman.
Oh, you mean on the Supreme Court?
Coney Barrett, is it her name? Amy Coney Barrett. I'm not sure about her, but I think Brett Kavanaugh is really strong, and I think Gorsuch is pretty good. I think he did very, very well, and a lot of what's happening now, outside of the executive branch, the abortion ruling and the affirmative action ruling, I think those are, his legacy. And so it was great he got there, and he might very well have a mechanism to get back, because I think, for what it is, I mean, you and I might decide that this is the best course to have, President DeSantis or President Ramaswamy or whatever, or, even President RFK Jr. But that's not how democracy or even a constitutional republic functioning with a democratic corollary is going to operate. And so within the realm of who is on the ballot at that point, if there's two candidates or three candidates or whatever, I'm going to want the better or best of those possibilities. And so I don't put Trump out of that realm of possibility of being on the ballot. And once he is, I would do everything to kind of push him across if he's running against Michelle or the living corpse of Joe Biden.
Well, Michelle Obama is never going to run for president.
How do you know that?
Because she's too lazy. She's never going to do it. She doesn't want to do
Look
it.
At Joe Biden has the energy of
Yeah, but he's this kind of cankered golem-like ambition, ambitious, power-seeking. I mean, this has been Joe Biden's dream.
What does she have to do? If he managed to run by sitting in his basement, you don't think she could run sitting in her basement?
Well, yeah, they could manufacture a campaign. I don't think she wants to hassle.
I think everything would be promised to her, and she wouldn't. I mean, she would be as much of a president as Joe Biden, and people on the left think he's an awesome president.
I know. I'm just saying. I totally concede all that. I mean, how much? Like your point is, how much is Joe Biden really doing? Not that much. The guy's wandering around. He doesn't really know where he is. I'm just saying Michelle's never gonna do that. That's my prediction, and Trump will win the nomination and then lose the presidential election, and then the Democratic victor, whoever that may be, will continue destroying the United States, and all of the people that kind of pulled Trump over the nomination finish line, because you might call them like the ever Trumpers, will blame everybody else for that.
Yeah, well, it's not dispositive. I mean, I'm not sure that nominee DeSantis will do better than nominee Romney per se.
Well, it's not Romney, right? It's like who would do better against the Democrat in 2024. And if you look at every single poll that they've done in swing states, and I've actually had a look at the polls myself, because polls can be designed to elicit particular types of responses, and other times the polls are designed to just actually try to get at the truth, right? So I had a look at a bunch of the polls. They didn't seem loaded at all. I'm saying that as a former pollster. And every single poll that I looked at, and they've been running them for like 6 months in swing states about who does better against Biden in 2024. DeSantis does better against Biden than Trump does. Trump will never win again. I'm not saying he shouldn't. I'm saying he won't. It will just never happen again. And, this is why it is, I concede your points about, a lot of good stuff happened. Trump made some really great decisions. He did some really great stuff. He didn't start any new stupid wars. He got his people on the Supreme Court. Economy was humming along. The energy independence thing was great. The idea of repatriating high value manufacturing jobs, and that initial kind of momentum toward that goal. I mean, that's just great. I mean, we have to do that. But it was difficult for me to watch him sabotage himself and commit unforced errors and ultimately lose power. And one of the things that we all really should remember is this kind of strange mindset now on the right, which is that Trump didn't really lose in 2020. He actually won the election, and there was all kinds of shenanigans, electoral chicanery, and he didn't really lose. So here's what I'm saying is, I'm not denying that there was electoral chicanery. I'm not even ruling out that they stole the election, but he lost power. And that's all that really matters in the end. You lost power. And it's kind of this thing where it's like there's this kind of horrible amoral level to politics, which Machiavelli talks about in The Prince, his famous work of political theory, which is there's all the normal moral stuff and the ethical stuff, but there is this kind of level where the ultimate political sin would kind of be not doing what it took to kind of keep power. presuming you were going to do good. I'm saying that presuming the person would want to do
Right.
good things. So I'm not saying breaking a law, but I mean, if you're derelict, if you're
It's tricky.
negligent,
It's
if
tricky. I
you're
mean, as we've seen with Hillary and Biden, they can pretty much, skin somebody on Main Street and get away with it. And
yeah, but
Republican doesn't have his shoelaces tied. He's going to get subpoenaed.
yeah, I know, but so like, but I know. Yeah, sure. Of course. Well, of course. I mean, everything that's happening now to Trump is what I said was going to happen to him like 3 years ago on one of our private, several of our private Zoom chats on video. I mean, I don't know if you were on some of those. I mean, this was always in the cards. This is why this guy needed to get into power, recognize that this vast, deep bureaucracy, this permanent DC hated his guts. He needed to accept that they hated his guts. They were always going to hate his guts. They were never going to give him the legitimacy, the validation which he craves. Never. And your Dale Carnegie, like win friends and influence people tricks are never going to work on these people. They're not like some aspiring model. It's not 1982, and you're not at a Manhattan nightclub where you're just going to seduce another young girl. It doesn't work that way with these people. This is like a demonic religion for these people. So you can't win them over. So don't try to win them over. You need to try to neutralize them. You need to reduce. You need to do whatever it takes.
Well, who's the last president who could do that? Who's the last nominee who could do that?
Who could? I mean, well, where I'm going is Donald Trump didn't really even try. He sucked up to these guys. He hired them. He's still sucking up to them. The guy's like running around with Lindsey Graham and he keeps installing. We get all of these these Trump holdouts complaining about the RNC and the establishment. Who is running the RNC? It's Ronna Romney McDaniel. Who keeps putting her into power? Donald Trump. Donald Trump used all of his clout to reinstall her over Harmeet and Mike Lindell. I mean, so we have this bizarre situation right now where the hardcore MAGA base can't, they keep cheering for Donald while they're complaining about all of these people who are the opposite of Donald, these anti-MAGA forces, like the rhinos, the establishment people, the warmongers, while Trump is cozying up to all of these people and in fact putting them in power. These are people that are they never stop complaining about Kevin McCarthy. Donald Trump endorsed Kevin McCarthy and used all of his clout to get him in as speaker. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. It's you tell people, I'm not saying we could I hate to say this about Bill Barr, but the one thing, I mean, I'm no fan of what happened there, but the one thing you kind of have to say he was on the money about was he said is if you did support Donald Trump's agenda, he would probably be the last person you would vote for to implement it, because the guy sabotages himself over and over and over again. You build this beautiful ship and then go puncture the hull so that you start taking on water, and now you're kind of going in circles and you can't get the job done.
That of course leaves us with the perfect is the enemy of the good. And it's I'm not sure, I like DeSantis.
He lost power. Trump got himself run out of DC. He lost power, and it's
I understand, but that doesn't mean that, the next Don Quixote is going to be a better iteration per se. I'm not sure, who the last great battler was. Maybe Ronald Reagan. But he didn't cure this beast either. I don't know if it's possible to have the form of government we have without a responsible populace, and I mean, I think John Adams posited this, that, our form of government requires basically
a moral and religious people.
Yeah. And, this kind of, comes full circle to our rugby guru, Thomas Arnold, and he would look at our country and kind of see the soy boy network that we're producing, and I don't know, I can't imagine he'd be fully happy with it. and I'm not sure that we have the nation and the spine, whatever, to keep kind of the independence in the American way that such as it
Yeah.
historically has been. You know, Herb Stein, Ben Stein's father, worked under Nixon, and he he has this kind of terse quote, which I like, which is that which can't continue doesn't. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. I mean, well, the federal bureaucracy was something of a fraction of what it is now under Reagan. So, yeah, I know. I guess Reagan was not like a giant, big slash and burn, permanent DC reducer, but I mean, he did have a pretty functional 8 years. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, no, that's all well
Yeah,
and good.
he had a successful 8 years.
Yeah, I agree, but it's hard, and I think people, they can't, whatever the verb for, I guess, preside as president,
Yeah.
fully by themselves. They have to buy in.
No, yeah, that's why you need your team. You need a right-hand man who's not like a New Jersey Democrat, which was what Jared Kushner was. You need a freaking. This is what I'm saying. It's like if you're Donald Trump.
I get it. I get it. He kept everything close in a certain way, and that's what's there. But he also had
the warriors.
But he had the cojones to run, and he had the cojones to win. And so, I admire his victories. I
know.
I think he would have had another one, but for this mass event, which was off the rule books. It's kind of like you and I are playing chess, and somebody blows up the floor underneath us, so we don't get to finish our chess game. I think it was not not playing by the rules. Yeah.
Well, of course not. But here's the thing: is like everything I'm saying, people dismiss or tend to often dismiss because they always say, "Well, hindsight's 2020." It wasn't. It's not hindsight. It was visible in real time, and this is why I can't emotionally get to the place where I absolve Trump to the extent that everyone else is that wants to see America great again.
Well, it's not my job.
Like,
it's not my job to absolve anybody per se. I mean, I'm going to be pragmatic about that. I try to pick the anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, let me give you an example. Donald Trump started announcing publicly that the Democrats were going to rig the 2020 election. The earliest one I could find was like within the first year. And it might have been earlier, but he would repeatedly say that Democrats are going to rig the presidential election in 2020. So the obvious question is, well, if you were serious about that, if that's really something that you thought they were going to try to do, what did you do? What was the plan that you presided over?
I agree with you. I think there's a functional. Yeah, there's a functional aspect where he'll say stuff and expect people to, congeal and carry that forward. I think it's a difficulty because it is not a federal task. I mean, the Electoral College, there was not even any direct voting by the populace for president for some time. We voted for literally for the legislature to make the electors that would get sent to Washington. There was no formality of having a national election. There wasn't the means or the kind of bureaucratic ability to hold a simultaneous election in 1792 or whatever. So we didn't have that. It was done on a much more diffuse basis, and again, kind of more regally, if you want to look back. So perhaps Thomas Arnold was right about the British Empire as being the pinnacle. I don't know. I don't think they did that well under COVID either. They've mutated. They don't even have the benefit of an actual constitution. They have this, I don't know, what do they call it? Kind of the living constitution. I forget what they call it. Just kind of this historical precedent. But they make their own precedents and whatnot. I mean, I don't know how. None of us get out of this alive. So I understand this, but hopefully we'll do pretty well in the meanwhile. Anyway, I'm going to round out the hour. Closing statements.
Closing statements. Okay. Well, first of all, Donald Trump had several options available to him, good options for preventing widespread election rigging in 2020, and that I can discover, knowing people in the administration and digging around, he just did nothing. So, that's number one. Number two, I want to just sound an alarm, as like the friend of everyone, like, watching this. People that don't like seeing the demolition of the United States. So we'll call them conservatives because they're trying to conserve what is great about America, what was always great about America. There is this weird, like, mental disease that has just pervaded this group of people, where they never stop coming up with excuses for inaction. Okay, there's always some excuse to not act. There's something in the Constitution. There's something here that, and is almost never true. It's just this weird inaction. It's like a rationale for cowardice and not acting, and not just getting off your butt and like coming up with an action plan and doing it. And it's really debilitating. It's like defeat begins in the minds of these people. I mean, that's another thing. Is like there is nothing that so-called conservatives love more than a noble defeat. We took the high road. Yeah, we got.
I don't think. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think he was derelict in his execution. I don't think he like. I think he's more with Thomas Arnold, like, wanting to win. But yes,
Yeah.
your points.
I mean, I'm not talking about anyone in particular right now, but I see a lot of this sort of expressed in sort of a lot of the chit chat on social media. On the right, is it's. Well, we couldn't do A, B, and C because that would make us as lousy as our opponents. Well, not necessarily. No, not at all. But that seems like another excuse for inaction. And it always leads to like another defeat, which conservatives take a completely perverse pride in, as their country is like literally going up in flames around them. It's being dismantled. And by the way, all of these institutions, state, municipal, county, federal, and corporations that have been co-opted by arms of government are creating the weak, amoral, irreligious soy boy population that you're complaining, that you're talking about. I mean, they're helping create that kind of citizen. I mean, it's just, but at least we still take the high road. It's like, I'm not saying break the law or be shitty. I'm saying, like, friggin' just get off your ass and do something like Donald Trump with like 2020. If you really believe that there's going to be widespread outcome changing electoral rigging, what is your plan? You don't even have to do anything. You wouldn't even necessarily need to invoke, although I don't know why they wouldn't. You wouldn't even need to invoke Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, which makes the federal government in charge of ensuring that states maintain, quote, a Republican form of government. Now, right there, you've got one window for federal involvement. Let's just say states were, say that groups of people at state levels were rigging their state presidential elections, right? They were rigging them. Well, that's not compatible with that maintaining a Republican form of government. So right there, you have a constitutional window for some sort of, federal demand for transparency. But nobody ever talked about that in the Trump administration, nor did he even ever grab Republican, governors or state, like GOP.
No,
state.
I agree. I think he has. He has a celebrity approach to the job, and he liked his meetings, and he likes having people applaud him and so forth. That is clearly, we don't get to build human, perfection, and so that's clearly his tragic flaw. I agree.
Yeah. So, it's like in the end you lost power, so you lost. So it almost kind of becomes irrelevant what the actual vote counts were. Believe me, I have been on vote fraud since for 30 years, since I was in university reading about this stuff. What I found 30 years ago was shocking and sobering enough. And this was before a lot of the computers came in. It was like punch cards and stuff, but it was very easy to manipulate election outcomes. And I found a whole bunch of cases. So it's not like I'm discounting election rigging. My question is, even today, what is the plan for preventing that kind of thing? Anyway, enough about that.
So we're going to call it a day. I'm going to just pop up my my book. If people want to help support our podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this one, it was amazing. And I'm in Tal's debt. You can buy my book, hopefully even read it. It's called Overturning Zika. the pandemic that never was. You might not remember. It was in Brazil, 2015, 2016. It's an incredible story, and you should go out and buy it. It's if you like your conspiracies, so forth, there's a little bit of that. If you like your Dr. Fauci's, misspending U.S. funding, kind of keeping a pandemic around for political purpose, it's all there. Anyway, you should check it out. So thank you so much, Tal. Appreciate you being here, and we'll chat again soon, I hope.